Warning. This podcast contains material that may or may not be considered appropriate for the average Trumptopian household. Listen at your own risk to unauthorized and explicit reading. Disclaimer. All rights to literature referenced are retained by appropriate entities, and no infringement is intended. The reading of any and all literary materials referenced herein is done expressly for the altruistic purpose of genuinely facilitating the species-wide pineal gland activating, third eye opening, transcendent spiritual enlightenment of all of humanity. Any and all opinions expressed herein are exclusively those of the imaginary talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And now, brace yourselves for unauthorized and explicit readings. Hello and namaste. Greetings and salutations, friends. Thanks for tuning in for this special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Unauthorized and explicit readings is about getting into the nitty-gritty of the words that matter. But first, a kind of disclaimer. It's a meme that I made a long time ago. I dug it up because I think it's applicable as we proceed here. It is not about believing in anyone or anything. Belief is mental slavery. It is about directly experiencing the truth. All ideology is ego trap. And to the best of my understanding, those are the original words of the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, your host today on Unauthorized and Explicit Readings. Thank you for joining me. Before we proceed, a little segment of breaking news. I won't play the intro because it's kind of too long for an introjection of the segment. But to the best of my understanding, it has already happened. Not that I am or anyone else is too terribly surprised, but I just saw some flashing headline notification, which is hopefully not fake news, and I'm hopefully not misreporting here, that as of this moment, as I speak to you live on Sprecher.com on a Wednesday afternoon on February 5th at 1:27 p.m. Pacific Time, in the year of 2020, Donald John Trump has been, acquitted of the first count, abuse of power, which is ridiculous. The GOP is literally trying to do what weird extremist governments around the world have been trying to do this most recent 15 years of human history, which is to eke is a bad phrasing, forgive me, slow walk themselves into a sort of democratically elected tyranny. But I will stop right there, folks, because that is not the subject of this current segment. This is, of course, unauthorized and explicit readings, so let's get right to the text. Today, instead of a long passage, I'm going to focus on a compilation of short segments from a bunch of different sources. Forgive me, I do not have paragraph and verse cited, but I feel strongly that if you were to look these up through Google, you would find that out for yourself and be able to look at the context that these statements come from. Forgive me for not having verse and page. But here we go. Kicking off with an unusual one, even for my own taste of selected material, because it came at me random. I'll be right up front. I got this quote in the moments before, as I prepared for the recording of this segment. And I get it from the little tag on my tea bag. I know that it's a real quote because I've heard it before. But Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great American naturalist and philosopher, gave us this beautiful insight 200 years ago, I guess? And that's just a ballpark figure. Don't sue me. But I quote, "The creation of 1,000 forests is in one acorn." Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then from the second tea bag, because yes, I make myself 2-bag teas, I quote, and this is something else that I know from memory to be an accurate and not fake newsy quote, okay? So, if you don't believe me, look it up. You got the internet. If you're listening to this show, you've got the internet, right? Here we go. Quote number 2 for today's episode. "In all things of nature, there is something of the marvelous." Aristotle. Now, I'd love, because Aristotle didn't speak that in English, I'd love to have the magical ability to instantly know Aristotle's native tongue and go and see the original quote in that original language, which is currently very foreign to me, to know if he used the marvelous or indeed some other word, for it is not unknown throughout history for, as scholars translate, for quotes to slightly drift, even innocently, from their original meaning because of certain word choosings. But let us give it the benefit of the doubt, and let's talk about these two things and how they might apply to the rest of the passages in this compilation of passages really quickly. In the creation, there is the creation of 1,000 forests in a single acorn. What does that mean? No, there will not be 1,000 different trees that directly come out of that acorn. One tree, one acorn. But multiple acorns then fall from that given tree if it succeeds in life, right? What is the life objective of any plant? To grow tall enough, to consume enough nutrients, to propagate its species by shedding seeds and sharing them with the world, right? And it's amazing because every plant, if you think about it really hard, must therefore originate from one singularity. Because if you, Mr. Emerson here, and what a goofy name, right? Ralph Waldo. Are there a lot of Ralph Waldos in America today, I wonder? Probably not. Does anybody really genuinely go by the name of Waldo anymore? Ralph is still around, I think, although I have not met a Ralph in ages. But that's a meaningless tangent. I digress. Ralph Waldo Emerson was sharing us an insight that nature provides if you contemplate the spiral of life in a forward motion. One little acorn, which is a singularity unto itself, right? It has no smaller components that can function in and of themselves. So it is one unity, even though it might have a cap and a thing, and science will dissect it, right? And say, well, this meaty part is different than this shell on the exterior, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, sure. And each of those things, each of those structural elements of the acorn is comprised of, how many thousand cells. But the acorn as a whole, any seed as a whole, no matter how many apparent structural elements it might have, if you cut it in half, it will not grow. It is dead. So it is categorically, in natural terms, actual, factual, organic, real life, how the fuck does this work terms, every seed is unto itself a singularity. And from that singularity springs forth an infinitely branching, fractal unfolding of propagation. Let that sink in and blow your mind a little bit. Now, turn that around and look backwards through time. And each and every single individual living thing called a tree or a plant or a shrub or a bush came from a seed. And where did that seed come from? Its progenitor, the previous plant, which has many components and involves pollen and pistils and and stamen and whatever all those fancy scientific labels are. But, sex, and before, that union of various genetic materials, but then regressing backwards, the mother and the father plant, they came from what? A seed. And that seed came from what? And it's a cycle that contracts backwards. If you understand what fractal unfolding means forward, an infinite and ever diversifying and ever complexifying branching of branching, then you know what it means going backwards. An ever simplifying, coalescing of unifying. Those branches, which feel like splitting up when moving forward, are in fact the act of unifying while looking backwards. And that ultimately, if all of plant life must have some common singular source, then all of cellular life must too. Powerful shit for Mr. Ralph Waldo Emerson in his proto-golden age of Wild Westy America to share with us, right? Okay. Now, all of nature shares that in common. All that which is alive in the natural world shares that in common with what we just, discovered within the seed, plant, flower rhythm. For it is that. It's a rhythmic cycle, right? And that, as mundane and boring as it may seem when you're just looking at a flower, is mind-blowingly marvelous, magical, mysterious, dare we say, divine. Moving on, friends, because Aristotle's quote is nice and clean like that it's pretty clear in its language. All things in nature contain the marvelous, the magical, the mysterious, and I'm adding those words, right? But the dare we say, divine. Here's another one for you. For it is no accident, this collection of quotes I've aggregated here for this episode. It just took me a long time to get round back to doing it. Quote, everything is the one Brahman, brackets God, comma, pure consciousness, comma, the self, with a capital S, of all, end quote. Let me read it again nice and cleanly without all the visual acupuncture, the visual, not acupuncture, what am I trying to say? All the speaking out of the structural elements of the sentence. Simply put, everything is the one Brahman, God, pure consciousness, the self of all. That is a quote I pulled from Yoga Vasita Sara. And there's a link there, but it's a weird Google site with a bunch of numbers. But Yoga Vasita Sara. Another quote, friends, because that's a pretty clean, straightforward quote. Everything is the one Brahman. the thing that we call God. Pure consciousness. I mean, I can't add to it, right? This sentence is so direct that I can't really pontificate about it. I mean, other than say, what is pure consciousness? Ask the questions, right, that lead you down the train of thought. The self of all, yourself, that which is inside of you, you call me, myself, and I, is the one thing, the one Brahman, the one pure consciousness. And it is not something that just some yogi mystic in India said. For Yahweh himself in the Bible says, I am who I am. And that isn't an individualist statement, as many North American preachers have obviously romanticized and misconstrued it into. It is a statement that says, from God's point of view, that God is the self of all. I am who is I am. Say the word I am. Say it out loud with me. I am. Right now. That which you indicated with those words is Yahweh saying, I am. Another quote. I am the all-comprehensive witness, the indivisible, homogeneous Brahman. I mispronounced that. It's Brahman. There is no extra A. Brackets, God, comma, infinite, comma, eternal, comma, being itself, comma, unbroken whole perfection, comma, existence, comma, eternal, comma, pure, comma, enlightened, comma, liberated, comma, and of supreme bliss. Vivekashodamani is the source of that quote. I am the all-comprehensive witness, the indivisible, homogeneous Brahman, God, infinite, eternal, being itself, unbroken, whole, perfection, existence, eternal, pure, enlightened, liberated, and supreme bliss. Oh, I screwed up. I started reading that quote halfway in the middle of that quote. So, I digress. The first part of that quote, which I failed to visually recognize, because I'm going up from the bottom of the list of quotes. So I'm at the bottom of the page that I accumulated these quotes on. And I visually only scanned to the next break. And I asked myself internally in a very self-critic way, why did I fail to open this quote with a quote bracket? With a bunny ears. What are those called? Quotes. Curlicues. And it's because it wasn't the beginning of the quote. But boom. Here is the beginning of that quote. That inner self, as the primeval spirit, eternal, ever effulgent, full, I think I mispronounced that word, effulgent. I've never heard anyone else pronounce it. That's why I think I mispronounced it, but maybe I pronounced it right. Let's start the quote over. Take 7. That inner self, as the primeval spirit, eternal, ever effulgent, full and infinite bliss, single, indivisible, whole, and living, shines in everyone as the witnessing awareness. Period. That self, in its splendor, shining in the cavity of the heart, as the subtle, pervasive, yet unmanifest either, illuminates this universe like the sun. I am the all-encompassing witness, the indivisible, the homogeneous Brahman God, infinite, eternal being self, unbroken whole perfection, existence, eternal, pure, enlightened, liberated, and supreme bliss. End quote. The source is Vivekachudamani, and that is spelled Vivekachudamani. Go read that for yourself. What can I interject? What can I comment on? Let's power through to some more of the text here. Here is a collection of statements from the Upanishads, Mahavakyas, or great sayings. And forgive me to anybody who can pronounce these words. I am not trying to mispronounce them on purpose. But here we go. Prajnaman, Brahma. Consciousness is God. Aham Brahma Asmi. I am God. Tat Tavam Asi. Thou art God. I am Atma Brahma. The Self is God. Upanishads, Mahakavakyas, the great sayings. The only thing I can add to that is that the duality, non-duality problem is that my ego will want to take that and say, well, if I am God, then I am super special and better than everyone else that doesn't realize that they are God. Nope. Homie, don't play that way. It would be more accurate in English to invert those sentence structures, which is a thought that's coming to me now. I could have, should have, would have, and I will now, friends, say that it, according to everything that I understand to be true, it is much more accurate. And it is probably much more correct to say that in the original language of Sanskrit or whatever, it is expressed this way, but the translations come to us from translators that forced the English paradigm onto these words and had to switch the sentence structure around. But it might be more accurate to say that God is consciousness, and God is that which is I am, and God is thou, or God art thou, right? God is the self. Let us scroll up and get to the next quote. From a source called The Star Maker, which at the moment slips my mind. I don't know what that is, but I must have liked it so much that I needed to include it here. Quote, I am, comma, and because I am, you are, period. I have always been, and I shall ever be, for I am without beginning and without end. I am life itself, for I am the very source of all that is. There is only one source, there is only one. Look to the very center of all that you are, and you will find me there. For I am life itself, the first cause of all that is. God is busy being you, not the other way around. And it does not matter who you are, whether you're Donald Trump or Mitt Romney, whether you are the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo or somebody listening to his podcast show in some obscure country that does not show up on the analytics page yet. God is busy being you. Let's scroll up some more. The following passage, it's a collection of quotes because I see a lot of end quotes sprinkled throughout, come from the temples of ancient Egypt, according to my notes. Mind you, I made this note forever ago, and I'll try to find the date. I know somewhere in here there should be a date from when I captured this stuff, or at least the last time I edited, but it might be this week because I edited it earlier this week. Never mind. I'll see if I can figure out to look up how to find when I originally created this file, but that may not be ultimately successful. But I know from my own awareness of time and how blurry it is that I gathered these quotes more than a few months ago. I digress. From the temples of ancient Egypt, quote, a man's heart is his own netter, which is, of course, an ancient Egyptian word for God. Quote, all is within yourself. Know your most inward self and look for what corresponds with it in nature, end quote. Quote, if his heart rules him, his conscience will soon take the place of the rod, end quote. Quote, if you would build something solid, Do not work with wind. Always look for a fixed point, something you know that is stable. Yourself. End quote. Quote, if you would know yourself, take yourself as starting point and go back to its source. Your beginning will disclose your end. End quote. Quote, know the world in yourself. Never look for yourself in the world, for this would be to project your illusion. End quote. That one smacks a bit stingy in the face of pertinent and meaningful and applicable in our modern context, does it not? I think it does, but we'll come back to it. Quote, knowledge is consciousness of reality, end quote. Quote, man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the gods, end quote. Quote, the body is the house of God. That is why it is said, quote, man, know thyself, end quote. New quote, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and whosoever shall know himself shall find it, end quote. And finally, you will free yourself when you learn to be neutral and follow the instructions of your heart without letting things perturb you. End quote. Wisdom from the temples of Egypt. And now another statement, this one from the temple of Apollo at Delphi in ancient Greece, or from ancient Greece. Quote, know thyself, and thou shalt know all the mysteries of the gods and of the universe. End quote. And now, let me bring it full circle, friends. Let me rock your universe a little bit, because I know that in my own time of discovery and of seeking and of searching these words out, I was shocked and amazed when I realized that this was littered everywhere, including the Gospels of the Catholic and Christian Bibles. Quote, Jesus in the Bible, before Abraham was, comma, I am, end quote. Quote, I and the Father are one. I mumbled in the middle of that. Quote, I and the Father are one, end quote. And, quote, the kingdom of God is within you, end quote. Jesus said those things in the Bible. Another thing that comes from the Bible, and forgive me for not having a specific book and passage reference, but I know it's there. Go find it. Quote, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? Question mark. End quote. I open this episode with the warning and disclaimer. It is not about believing in these words, right? We have been conditioned into a hypocrisy that you gotta believe in yourself. What does that mean? What does that mean? Now, in the commonplace, most like wishy-washy interpretation of that, we think that means a good thing, right? We think it means have confidence. We think it means that you can endow yourself with strength through this act of believing in yourself. But maybe, just maybe, the post-contemporary, the post-Tower of Babel use and misinterpretation of belief in yourself is a subtle and sickly sweet honeypot of distraction, leading us not closer to a direct phenomenological experience of our divine self, but further away. Because we are choosing most normally, most traditionally, most stereotypically to believe in our identity, in our individuated aloneness, in our singularity that is this thing separate from the divine, apart from it, and not worthy of it. Yes, believe that you can achieve stuff, right? That's a good thing to believe in. I can make stuff happen. I can get a job. I can write that book that I haven't finished. I can change the world. Believe in those things if they're good things. But don't get caught up in believing in yourself to the point of distraction. Better than belief, better than believing in, is knowledge and knowing. The direct, tangible, real, phenomenological experiencing of. That's what knowing is. Knowing is not the memorization of a fact. That's another way in which those words and that terminology has been abused and misused, friends, right? We think that knowing something means we've learned it. Nonsense, I say. Humbug. Sorry, if it sounds weird, it's because I realized that I need to plug in my recording device, the iPad, and I know I had a spare charger cable laying around, and I don't know where it is all of a sudden, and I need to plug it in before it crashes on me and ends this episode. But where did I put that cable? Object that I seek, do my bidding. Find it. Finding yourself, find me again. Where are you? Where did I put you? Anyways, my point is, silly but very important. Are we to be busy believing in identity constructs, which are, quite often, imbued with ego? Or is it better for us? Is it healthier for us? Is it more powerful in truth to know through direct phenomenological experience that which all this wisdom from the ancients informs us of? To know directly through experiencing the fact that consciousness is not the result of some electrobiochemical activity in the squishy substance trapped in our skull, but that its root source is that which we bow down to in temple, that which we are told to obey, is not out there somewhere looking down on us in judgment, but is inside ourselves indeed, looking out our eyes and role-playing the part of the person that we play in this realm we call reality. And that means everyone is. For if God is omnipresent, then there cannot be anyone separate from God. If God is all-pervasive, ubiquitous, and the very root source of the thing we call consciousness, the phenomena we call awareness, the beingness of all life, then no one can be separate from that which we call God. Or everyone is. And that's the only place, the only time, in reference to things about reality that we must discuss, that I ever draw an absolutist line. Because absolutism, generally speaking, and I'm not trying to carve a special exemption for myself, I just think that you get to a place where you go, whoa, that's got to be it. Like, in other words, nothing in the universe is absolute, except for the statement that all that is alive must be one in its oneness with divinity. How can there be any exception from that? How can God be the root source of life itself and there be anyone who is separate from God? Right? Doesn't make sense. Then why do we spend so much time waving flags and banners and accusing this group and that group of being godless heathens worthy of being wiped off the face of the earth in the name of our favorite God? Is that the game God really wants to play here? While he and or she and or both are busy being each of us? Or is that some weird inverse opposite creation of our ego whose job it is to be as ungodly as possible within this game we're playing, this dance, this illusion, this dream we're dreaming? I humbly propose to you, friends and listeners, that this is what society, politics, and religion are designed to distract us from. And yeah, they'll even pay lip service to this. Because that's how sophisticated and nuanced ego has gotten at being the bad guy in this realm. And if there's one focal point where we can pin the accusatory title of, aha, you're the puppet master, it is that which we call ego, which is in and of itself, not a strong enough, big enough, large enough, all-encompassing enough word to truly identify and describe that which we point to when we say ego. But ego in and of itself is not independent, separate from, or outside of divinity, that which we call God. So, how can we cut to the chase? How can we end the merry-go-round meat grinder of bullshitting ourselves? Well, it certainly probably is not by falling for more ego traps. It is very unlikely that the solution to this vexing problem we find ourselves in is to go and butcher ourselves some more over ego-driven ideological constructs about reality and how it works, because that has gotten us nowhere, has it? Perhaps, I humbly posit to you, friends and listeners, that the solutions are found not out there, but within. And that the solutions require us not to enact change through butchering each other out there, but transformation through healing ourselves deep within. And then once we understand that, turning around and helping to heal each other. Because as I am fond of saying, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the moment we stop arguing and we start healing is the moment that we will overcome, transform, and transmute this madness into holistic clarity. And arguably, I could be wrong. Knock on wood. But I could be wrong. I hope I'm not. But I think if we choose this other path, which we have so eloquently distracted ourselves from over and over and over again, despite the fact that throughout time and place and history, someone has spoken these words to remind us. Before Abraham was I am. I am because we are. And we are because I am. Again and again and again and again throughout time, we have tried to shake ourselves awake from the madness. And maybe shaking each other is not the right way, right? But somewhere in the mystery called healing, somewhere there, I think, we shall find the right door to open. As always, friends, thank you for tuning in. I hope these words impact you in the same profound and liberating way that they have impacted me in my life. And mind you, I do not claim to be perfect, right? I've already gone off about that. But step by step, little by little, we go round and round and round the spiral. And as we move through that process, we can all find freedom, real freedom, not ideological freedom, not political freedom, not religious freedom, but freedom, full stop, the real thing. Amen. Om Shanti Metta Shanti Om Namaste. Until next time, I have been your humble host, the esoteric, entheogenic mystic known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let it be remembered, friends, you and I, we have always been each other, pretending not to be God.